رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون. الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين والشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم وغاصب حقوقهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. صلوات عليك. In the Azah of Sayyid al-Shuhada, besides the Azadari that we have, we get this opportunity to revive our faith, to increase our awareness about our own madhab, and as well as it becomes an opportunity to reform ourselves on a spiritual level, on the akhlaqi level, and that is done by the process of the Majalis that we have, where the actual purpose is the azah at the end, but the discussion and the talk before that becomes actually a byproduct of that azah. And this is where we see that, the azah of Sayyid al-Shuhada is considered to be the lifeline of the Shia community. Even if they don't have any other system, at least they have this one, where people, because of their emotional and religious attachment to Imam Hussain alayhi salam, would show up, and that's where they get the opportunity to learn about their own faith and to become more committed to the cause of Imam Hussain and his family and the ashab alayhimu salatu wassalam. Salawat alayhi. The theme that I have been discussing during these Majalis for this ashra is the theme of continuity and change in Islam, where the purpose is basically to answer the question that how can a religion which came in a place very far away, centuries ago, how can that religion still be relevant to us in this part of the world, in this century? And as I've been saying, the answer lies in understanding the process of continuity and change in Islam. Let me summarize that there are three areas. We look at the i'tiqadat, the system of belief. In there is no room for any change. Then we look at the second area of discussion, which was ibadat. And there we saw a kind of mixture of continuity and change, where continuity was more, but change was also possible in the way we implement some of the ibadat. Then the main part of my discussion, which we started yesterday, was on muamalat, which deals with our lifestyle, how we live on a daily basis. And this is where we see that when it comes to the issue of continuity and change, they are almost balanced. There is continuity in the values that Islam is promoting. There is also the possibility of change, because these are the issues which are dependent on the culture and the time and the space that we find ourselves. Islam did not want itself to be tied to one area or one time frame in history, and therefore it has this inbuilt, adaptability that wherever it emerges, people can still maintain their culture, modify it according to the principles of Islam, and still be true Muslims. Salawat alaykum. As a preamble to that discussion last night, we talked about the process of hijrat and migration, because that's how Islam basically has spread around the world. And we saw that there is no problem from the Islamic point of view in the concept of hijrat and migration, as long as we are able to maintain our faith and work in order to teach that to the next generation in the new land. If we are able to do that, there is absolutely no problem in that hijrat. And if we are not able to do that, then the process of hijrat has to continue. And we'll have to move somewhere else where we can practice our faith and preserve it for the next generation. And this is where we see that, this is how Islam basically looks at itself and considers it to be truly a world religion. Islam, of course, was, it started in Arabia, and our Prophet was from the Arabic background. But that doesn't mean that this is the religion of the Arabs. And even when we talk about the term religion here, we have to realize that it's not only spirituality. The term religion for Islam is not adequate enough to explain its reality. Islam does not only deal with the issue of man-God relationship, that we have to worship Him and that's all. Islam equally gives importance to man-man relationship. Means you have this vertical line of human being, serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that in that process he has to live in a society with people around him, the family, the relatives, the friends, the community, and the humanity at large. And Islam says even in that, horizontal level of relationships, Islam has guidelines. And so simple things like what we eat and drink, to the issue of dress code, to more important complex issues of life, marriage, divorce, inheritance. Even when we talk about career choice, Islam has certain guidelines. In some areas it is very elaborate, in other areas it's just simple guidelines that we have to follow. So a Muslim cannot say my religion is a weekend event. It's not a hobby. It's not something that I do sometimes and at other times I'm busy with my life. No, my life is my religion. And my religion is my life. There is nothing that we can run away from our religion in whatever we are doing. And, if you study some of the writings of the non-Muslims who have come into the fold of Islam, it's interesting that for them the most appealing feature of Islam was this overall, guidelines that Islam has. Sometimes they put it in a very funny way. They say, Islam doesn't leave you alone. And go and talk to Muslims about it, who are born. They don't like it. But those who have come from outside, they appreciate that. And they say Islam is a religion which doesn't leave you alone. In whatever position and situation you are, your religion is with you. It will tell you this is right or wrong, or it will say you have an option to do whatever you want in that given situation. And so when we talk about Islam in that way, we have to realize that yes, it must have something, that it can be relevant to different people and different cultures around the world. Today, alhamdulillah, every fourth person walking on this face of the earth is a Muslim. 3 years ago, we used to say every fifth person. But now, according to the data which has been issued by Vatican itself, it has gone up. It's now every fourth person on this earth is actually follower of Islam. And the Arabs are in a minority. They are really in a minority as far as the world of Islam is concerned. And that's where we have to realize that what is it there in Islam that in spite of being a religion which started in Arabian environment, it was able to emerge in different societies and guide them according to the values of Islam. When we talk about culture, what do we mean by that? Because I think our talk has to be very clear, what I mean when I use this word. For the purpose of our discussion, I'm using the term culture here, or lifestyle, about everything that we do which is not part of i'tiqadat and ibadat. If anything has to do with the belief system, it's part of the i'tiqadat, and we mentioned earlier, there is no room for change there. When it comes to rituals and ibadat, we know there is some room for flexibility, but mostly it's continuous process. Other than that, how we live our life, the lifestyle or the culture that we have, this is the area where we see that continuity and change work almost equally. When you look at the issue of Islam, Islam did not move around in different parts of the world to totally transform the cultures of others' societies and communities. No, it basically came to modify the lifestyle. Wherever there was problem with Islamic values, they were told, don't do this. When it came to the issue of, for example, Islam didn't come to force Arab clothing on us, Arab food on us, or Arab lifestyle on us. Other cultures from different parts of the world were allowed to maintain their own culture as long as there was no conflict between what they did and the Islamic values. So the issue was of modifying it according to Islamic values. The term used is Islamization, not Arabization. The Prophet did not come to impose Arab culture on the world. The Prophet came to basically spread the message of Islam around the world. Salawat. Islam could not have tied itself to one space or one time, because when you look at the lifestyle and the cultural issues, these are all dependent on zaman and makan, on time and space. And because the zaman and the makan changes, and we'll come to that, why it happens that way. Because when we look at our personal lifestyle or social aspects of life, we see that every ethnic group has been given flexibility. You can maintain your diet and your food as long as there is nothing haram in it. You can maintain your dress, your national dress, or your ethnic dress, as long as it fulfills the criteria that we have in Sharia for a person's how much you should be covering yourself. And this is where we see that when it comes to lifestyle, all these things actually depend on natural resources and the level of technology and knowledge that a given society has. And because the natural resources are different in different parts of the world, Islam could not have forced people to live like Arabs, for example. Because maybe what Arabs had, their natural resources were in their own area only. But because the natural resources are Allah's blessing for all nations around the world, they live according to whatever they have. So Islam just says, make sure you do not do something which is haram. You can still maintain your culture and your lifestyle, according to the resources and the knowledge and technology that you have to exploit the natural resources, provided you do not violate the basic teachings and laws of the Sharia. Salawat alaykum. I am talking in theory till now. Let me give you an example now. And this example is about modesty and decency in dress for women. But I want to let the ladies know the topic is not hijab. Don't worry about it. We are not going to talk about hijab, but I'm going to use hijab as the most obvious and clear example of what is known as continuity and change in lifestyle. When we look at this issue, there are three different areas regarding hijab that I would like to talk. Number one, look at the ayat of Quran. Interestingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about hijab in Surah An-Nur, He begins by talking about a very different kind of hijab. He's not talking about the hijab of dress. He talks about the hijab of eyes. The very first ayah says, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, O Muhammad, says to the believing men. We forget this ayat and we only talk about the second ayat. The first ayat is saying, O Muhammad, say to the believing men, يَغَضُّ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفُظُ فُرُوجُهُمْ, that they should cast down their glances or their gaze when a non-mahram is there. And they should protect themselves as far as their behavior is concerned. ذَلِكَ أَذْكَ لَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. This is more pure for their character, and Allah knows what they do. Then the second ayah says, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ, and O Rasul, say to the believing women, يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفُظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ. Same order that the women are also, believing women are being told that, cast down your gaze in presence of non-mahram and, protect yourself as far as your behavior is concerned. The command is for men as well as women both. This hijab of eyes is a common command, and this is for all the time. It's nothing to do with the clothing. It has to do with the gaze and the glance of our eyes. And it is there always. You can't take this hijab out. And it is there. It can come down and go up very easily, very, very flexibly. And so we have to keep in mind that when we talk about this issue, the challenge of casting down our glance or lowering our gaze from decent scenes is becoming increasingly difficult for us in the western part of the world. Wherever you go, you will see ads which have improper, pictures, whether in shops or the billboards or the magazines or on TV, commercials. And not only that, it's not only limited to that. With the advance in technology, Shaitan has found more ways of tempting and misguiding believing men through the internet. And that's where the hijab of eyes comes in. So we have to realize that, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about this hijab of eyes first, before even He talks about the hijab, the dress for the women, He's talking about something which is part of our human nature. This is a challenge which is going to be there all the time. And therefore this ayat of Quran and this mas'ala of our Sharia is never going to become obsolete. It was applicable during the days of the Prophet in Mecca and Medina. It is relevant to us even now. Probably it's more relevant to us even now for us because, as our Imams have said in many, many different ahadith, with every ni'mat comes a bala. With all these new means of, communication, we have options of using it rightly or wrongly. And the challenges are increasing, and therefore this mas'ala will never change. We just have to deal with it. And we can actually look at it that this is not something, unique or weird in Islam. If you look at the New Testament, the Bible, Isa ibn Maryam also talks about the hijab of eyes. In the Gospel of Matthew, he says, "You have heard that it was said by them of old time, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. So it's not only Quran which talks about it, even the New Testament. Even Isa alayhi salam is talking about it. So when we look at this issue, of course, this is one of the areas where I would say that Islam would want to modify the lifestyle of Muslims in the Western culture. It's not the whole culture is to be changed. This is where we see the modification element comes in. The problem is that in this culture, eye contact is very important. I'm told if you go for interview, if you don't have eye contact, you're not going to get the job. In business deals and things like that, where in Islam you're told if a lady is there who is not mahram to you, you cast down your glance. Immediately they'll say there's a problem with this guy. They'll start, psychoanalysis about him. Because of the difference in the value that we have. And it's a challenge. And I'm not saying this is something which can be easily handled. But if Muslim men keep in mind that this is an ayat of Quran, a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is actually for all the time because it's part of our nature. And our nature is not going to change. The challenges would be there. If we keep that in mind, we would be able to deal with it in a better way. At least we will become vigilant that even if we have eye contact, we are controlling our intentions. And this is where we are talking about as an example where Islam does not come and say you totally eliminate the culture of other societies, but this is where the element of modification comes in. Salawat. Coming to the second point on the issue of hijab, to show this example of continuity and change, let me now talk about the hijab of the women. And here we see that Quran has very clearly given some general guidelines about how a Muslim woman has to cover herself whenever she steps outside her mahram circle. It's not that they are to be confined to the homes, but the issue is that if you live your circle of mahramiyat, then there are certain rules and regulations of modesty and decency in interaction as well as dress code comes in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has talked about it in Surah An-Nur, Surah number 24, as well as Surah Al-Ahzab, which is Surah number 33. And you will see, you will actually be able to get complete guideline of hijab just by studying these two ayat carefully. In Surah An-Nur, ayat number 30 and 31, after this issue of hijab of the eyes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. The first order about the women, that they should not expose their beauty except what is natural and obvious. This, for example, the issue of hands and the face. Number 2, وَلِيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ فِي جُيُوبِهِنَّ. That the khumur, the hijab, the scarf that they have over their head, they should lower it down over their bosoms. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتُهُنَّ إِلَّا لِبَعُولَتِهُنَّ. And they are not allowed to expose their beauty to anyone but those who are mahram to them. And then the ayat goes on, gives a long list of the men in the family who are mahram to a lady. And then number 4, later on after that list, Allah says, وَلَا يَضْرِبَنَّ بِأَرْجُلِهِنَّ. And even the way they walk, even the body language is very important in maintaining decency and modesty, that when they walk, it shouldn't be that their beauty is exposed. And then, tubu ilallahi jami'an ayyuhal mu'minun, all men and women all together, do tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that you may gain falah and salvation. In Surah Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adds one more ayat. There He says, Ya ayyuhan nabi, O the Prophet, say to your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers, say to them what? يُدْنِينَ عَلَيْهِنَّ مِنْ جَلَابِيبِهِنَّ. That the women, when they go outside, they should also put their jalabib on themselves. What is jalabib? Jalabib is plural of jalbab. Jalbab, this is, the outer covering over their clothes. So if you look at these two ayats together, you will see everything is covered there. Although, of course, we have the ahadith of the ma'sumin, the details which are there, but even these two ayats studied properly, even according to the grammatical understanding of the ayat, it is very clear that the Quran is addressing the believing women. This ayat is not saying, "Oh, Arab women." So this issue of hijab is not a cultural issue. It's not confined to the Arab culture. It is addressing mu'mineen, mu'minat, women, wherever they are. Whether they are in Arabia or Persia or India or Indonesia or Africa or America. This ayat would be there, and this is one of the constant values and teachings of Islam. Salawat. And this has nothing to do with the issue of degrading the status of the women. This has everything to do with the rules of modesty and decency from the Islamic perspective. I'm amazed when I look at the Christians, the Catholics, when they look at the nuns, they respect her because of her attire, known as habit. But when a Muslim woman comes out dressed almost in the same way, they say, "Oh, the poor lady. Her husband or father must have forced her to dress that way." And when I talk to the Catholics, sometimes they say, "Well, in Catholic tradition, the nuns have a special honor, and their dress reflects that." And I respond to them by saying, "Well, Islam wants that honor for all Muslim women, not only for the nuns." And so when we talk about this issue, we realize that sometimes they use the term, "Oh, this is cultural." Be careful about it. It's there in the Quran. And there is no ayat saying this ayat is mansukh. It is there for all the time because these issues enter human relationship across the genders are issues of the past, the present, as well as the future. Salawat. It is not something which can change by place of location and time. It's not something like if you're in Tehran airport, it's on. When you land in London Heathrow, it's off. It's not something that you can do that. But let me now move on to the third point, where we see the continuity ends and the change comes in as far as the hijab is concerned. And that is about the style and the material. You see, the ayat of Quran said that when the mu'minat, ladies come out, this is how they have to cover themselves. But it didn't say what would be the style of the clothing that they will wear when they cover themselves. Why? Because Islam did not want to tie itself to one culture. Islam is a world religion. These issues depend on the culture, the natural resources, and this is where the issue of zaman and makan comes in. If you look at the Muslim women in the centuries, 14 centuries have passed. Long before, we have all these new problems of our society, you will see that the mu'minat women looked at the same ayat of Quran, the same teaching of hijab, but mu'minat women in different cultural background implemented that same ruling in a different style. This is where you see continuity and change going hand in hand when it comes to lifestyle and culture is concerned. In Arabia, when these ayat were, in Medina, when it came down, for the Arab women, the most easy available, material for them was abaya. The ayat of Quran didn't say put on the abaya. That was their cultural choice. That is what was available to them in that culture and that time. And they used it to cover themselves. Islam moves from Arabian Peninsula, goes on to Persia. The community gradually, not all of a sudden, gradually came into the fold of Islam. Persian women now looking at the same ayat of Quran, implementing the same law of the Sharia, they didn't adapt the abaya of the women, Arab women. They looked at their own natural resources, their own style, their own culture, and they came up with what is known as chador. Islam moves on, goes into Afghanistan and South Asia, India. Many communities there became Muslim. They looked at this requirement of Islam. They didn't say, okay, let's put on the abaya of the Arabs because the Prophet was an Arab and Quran is in Arabic. No. They looked at their own environment. They looked at their own culture, the clothing which were available to them, the material that they were familiar with. And they implemented the same ayat of the Sharia, the same law of the Sharia by coming up with what is known as niqab or parda. Further on, Islam, after centuries, moved on to Indonesia. Although the Indonesian women there had all the varieties already there, the Arabs were there, the Persians were there, South Asian Muslims were there, but they looked at their own natural resources and they basically came up with something Indonesian, they call it kerudung. It is a different type of hijab that the Muslim Indonesian women use. You look at East Africa. When Islam reached there, the African Muslim women, when they realized, okay, this is an issue that we have to address, they did not follow the abaya system or other. They had their own, something in Swahili known as bui bui. And now we are here in the western part of the world. Practicing Muslim women here, they use Western clothes with certain modification in order to fulfill the requirements of the Sharia. This is where you see continuity and change, interacting with one another on an equal basis. Salawat. The law was one. Manifestation of that law, because it was a cultural issue, depended on different areas in different ways. As long as all these styles of hijab fulfill the requirements of the Sharia, each one of them are equally Islamic. You cannot say wearing of the abaya is Islamic, putting on of the chadar is less Islamic. Putting on the abaya is 100% Islamic, putting on the parda of India, for example, is 80% Islamic. No. As long as the basic requirements are fulfilled, all these forms of hijab would be equally Islamic. And that is where we see that when we talk about, the Western clothing. There are challenges, there are problems. If a lady puts on loose pants, long shirt, with a scarf where the ends go on the front, covering the bosom as the Quran says it, then that is fulfilling the requirements of the Sharia. It is acceptable. On the other hand, if the same Western clothes of a different style are used, tight-fitting jeans with a tight sweater till the waist, and then a piece of cloth on the top, that is absolutely not fulfilling the requirements of the Sharia. So it's not really Western or Eastern issue. It is the issue is that what are the criteria, what are the requirements? If they are fulfilled in any cultural background, that would be equally Islamic. Salawat alayhi. This is where you see the basic rule is a constant value in Islam of hijab, modesty and decency, but the style is variable. And why it's variable? Because Islam did not come to impose Arab culture on us. Islam has allowed various cultures to practice Islam in their own cultural environment. We talked about the language issue yesterday. This was one more obvious example. And as I said to the ladies, I'm not talking about hijab as a topic. It's just an example of universality as well as diversity in the Islamic lifestyle. But since I have said so much, I would like to make one more comment about it. That the problem in the western part of the world that we have in our own communities. One is the issue of be hijabi, and the other is the issue of bad hijabi. You know the difference between that? Be hijabi without hijab. Bad hijabi is pointless hijab. Those who don't observe hijab, they don't observe it. But those who do it, and it is bad hijabi, that I don't understand. Why? If you are doing it, at least do it properly. What is this bad hijabi? There was an American young Muslim girl observing this bad hijabi, pointless hijab in the community of the Muslims. She came up with a very comical article on it, where she gives different names to different styles of bad hijabi. She says there is one which is known as Mickey Mouse hijab. But the hijab is there, but the ears are still showing. Another, she says, it's a saran wrap hijab. This plastic used by women to cover the balls when they put it in the fridge. Transparent dupatta. And the most interesting for me was what she described, convertible hijab. Convertible cars where the roof goes up and down. She says you go to any Muslim gathering, when somebody comes on the stage and starts A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem reciting Quran, all the dupattas go up. And as soon as he says Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim, it all goes down. The point is that if you are doing hijab, at least do it in a way that Allah and Rasul and Imam is pleased with you. What is the point of putting on a hijab where no Allah, Rasul and Imam is pleased, and even you are inside, if you think about it, you know you are not really fulfilling what you should be doing. Salawat alayhi. And so when we talk about the issue of lifestyle, we have to realize that Islam is a world religion, and it has given this flexibility. When it comes to aqidah, it's different. When it comes to ibadat, it's one thing. But when it comes to muamalat, how we live our life, that's where the flexibility comes in. And this is what we have to realize, especially after having moved to the western part of the world. We talked about the concept of hijrat and migration and its demands last week, but this also goes in that same context. जो मौजू हमने अपनाया है, जहाँ सेबात और तगय्युर की बात हो रही है, कि इस्लाम वो दीन है जो सिर्फ अरेबियन पेनिनसुला के लिए नहीं था, सिर्फ अरबों के लिए नहीं था, पूरी दुनिया के लिए है, हर कौम के लिए है, हर इलाके के लिए। और ये उसी वक्त हो सकता है कि जब रसूल इस्लाम अरबियत को इम्पोज करने नहीं आए, इस्लाम को इम्पोज करने आए। और उसमें आप देखेंगे कि जहाँ तक एतक़ादात की बात है, उसमें कोई तब्दीली नहीं आ सकती है। इबादात में ज़्यादातर सबात और कंटिन्यूटी नज़र आएगी, कुछ उसके पहलू हैं जिसमें तगय्युर नज़र आएगा, आपको गुंजाइश है उसमें। लेकिन मुआमलात, जिसमें हम लोग अपने लाइफस्टाइल को कहते हैं, बूदोबाश की बात होती है, किस तरह से हम जिंदगी बसर करते हैं, ये मुआमलात जो है कल्चर से हमारा ताल्लुक़ है, जो हमारे नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज हैं उस पर डिपेंड करता है। لہذا اسلام نے ان معاملات میں باتوں کو صرف جنرلی چھوڑ دیا ہے، ڈیٹیلز کو ہمارے ہاتھ میں رکھا کہ تم دیکھو کہ کہیں ٹکراؤ نہ ہو جائے شریعت کے کسی قانون کے ساتھ، پھر اپنے ہی کلچر اور تہذیب کے لحاظ سے زندگی بسر کرو، اس میں کوئی قباحت نہیں۔ یہ زمان و مکان کی جو بات ہوتی ہے، ممکن ہے کچھ لوگ سمجھیں گے بھائی کہ بہت ہی ماڈرنائز ہو گئے ہیں آج کل، زمان و مکان کی بات کر رہے ہیں اسلام میں۔ نہیں، ہم ائمہ کی زندگی سے ایک مثال آپ کو پیش کرنا چاہیں گے، وہی لباس کے حوالے سے، کہ ایک بار امام جعفر صادق علیہ السلام اپنے اصحاب کے ساتھ بیٹھے تھے، غالباً یہ حج کا زمانہ ہے، مکے کی بات ہو رہی ہے، مسجد الحرام میں، اور اس دن امام نے اب جو کپڑا پہنا ہوا تھا وہ ذرا عمدہ قسم کے تھا، گڈ کوالٹی مٹیریل تھا۔ ایک شخص جس کا نام تاریخ میں سفیان الثوری ہے، یہ صوفی تھا اس زمانے میں، صوفی یہ مسلک کا، اور یہ لوگ کہتے ہیں کہ بھائی آپ جو ہیں دنیا و مافیہ سے آپ الگ رہیں، تبھی آپ دیندار بن سکتے ہیں۔ وہ آیا، اس نے دیکھا کہ بھائی ابن رسول اللہ، آل رسول اور علی پر اتنا زرق برق کپڑا پہنے ہوئے ہیں، دل میں کہتا ہے کہ چلو موقع ملا ذرا نصیحت کریں گے، یعنی جرأت بھی آپ دیکھیں، کیونکہ خود صوفی تھے، زاہد تھے، متقی تھے، آج ان کو موقع ملا کہ ایک آل محمد امام کو کہ ان کی تنبیہ کریں یا نصیحت کریں، تو وہ آ کے کہتے ہیں کہ آپ نے یہ کیا پہنا ہے، یہ لباس آپ کے لیے نہیں ہے، ان ھذا اللباس لیس من لباسک، اس لیے کہ آپ کے جد رسول اللہ اور علی اس قسم کا لباس نہیں پہنتے، ان کا لباس بہت ہی سادہ ہوا کرتا۔ تو امام نے کہا کہ بھائی کیوں تم یہ کہتے ہو کہ یہ لباس میرا لباس نہیں ہو سکتا ہے؟ تو پوچھتا ہے کیا آپ اہل دنیا ہیں؟ اگر آپ اہل الآخرہ ہیں تو آپ دنیا کے لذات سے دور رہیں گے۔ تو امام نے کہا کہ کس نے تم سے کہا ہے کہ خداوند عالم کی نعمتیں صرف گناہ گاروں کے لیے ہے؟ یعنی جو کچھ خداوند عالم نے دنیا میں نعمتیں پیدا کی ہیں یہ صرف کافرین کے لیے ہیں، منافقین کے لیے ہیں، فاسقین کے لیے ہیں، فاجرین کے لیے ہیں، اور جو متقی و پرہیزگار ہیں ان کے لیے نہیں۔ پھر امام نے کہا کہ تم صحیح معنوں میں اگر سوال کچھ معلومات حاصل کرنے کے لیے کر رہے ہو تو بیٹھو تو ہم جواب دیں، کیونکہ امام جانتے تھے اس کی نیت جو ہے کچھ اور، لیکن اگر کسی اور مقصد کے لیے پوچھ رہے ہو تو ہمارے پاس تمہارا کوئی جواب نہیں، اتنا ہی کافی ہے بس۔ وہ غصے میں چلا گیا وہاں سے، لیکن اس اصحاب امام نے جو ہے اس آرگیومنٹ کو کنٹینیو رکھا کہ امام اس نے رسول اور علی کا حوالہ دیا ہے کہ رسول کا لباس سادہ ہوا کرتا تھا، علی کا لباس بھی بہت ہی سمپل ہوا کرتا تھا، اور اس کا پوائنٹ ویلڈ ہے کہ آپ جو لباس آج پہنے ہوئے ہیں وہ اچھی کوالٹی کا ہے، اچھا مٹیریل ہے، یہ بہت ہی عمدہ کپڑا ہے، اور رسول اور علی کی سیرت سے مطابقت نہیں رکھتا ہے۔ تو وہ سوال اپنی جگہ پہ ہے۔ پھر امام نے کہا کہ تم بیٹھو سب، اور اس وقت مولا فرماتے ہیں کہ اخبرک ان رسول اللہ کان فی زمان مغفر جذب، امام نے زمان کی تعبیر استعمال کی کہ تمہیں یہ بات سمجھ میں نہیں آ رہی ہے کہ رسول ایک زمانے میں تھے جو فقر و فاقے کا دور تھا، عام طور سے معیشت جو ہے لوگوں کے سٹینڈرڈ آف لیونگ لو تھی، خصوصاً آپ ہجرت کے بعد کے حالات کو دیکھیں، 3 دن کے فاقے کو دیکھیں، اکثر دن گزر جاتے تھے اور کھانے کو نہیں ہوتا تھا، تو فقر و فاقے کا زمانہ تھا، اور امیر المومنین بھی اپنے زمانے میں حالات کو دیکھتے ہوئے امیر کی حیثیت سے، سربراہ مملکت اسلامیت کی حیثیت سے اس زمانے میں جو سب سے کمزور طبقہ تھا ان کے ساتھ مواسات کے خاطر سمپل لائف گزارتی تاکہ فقیر انسان بھی مجھ سے ریلیٹ کر سکے. پھر مولا فرماتے ہیں لیکن اب زمانہ بدل گیا ہے، جنرل سٹینڈرڈ آف لیونگ مسلمانوں کا بڑھ چکا ہے، حالات وہ نہیں ہیں جو علی اور رسول کے زمانے کے تھے، لہذا اب مجھے اجازت ہے کہ ہم اپنے زمانے کے لحاظ سے عمدہ قسم کا لباس پہنیں. تو امام نے بھی زمان کی بات کی ہے کہ زمان اور زمان میں فرق ہے. ہاں لیکن امام نے ایک جملہ کہا تھا کہ لیکن مواسات ہمیشہ کے لیے ہے. ہمیں اپنے زمانے کے سٹینڈرڈ کو دیکھتے ہوئے ہمارے زمانے میں جو غریب ہیں ان کے اس لیول پر ہمیں رہنا ہے، لیکن وہ لیول بھی علی کے زمانے کے لیول سے کہیں بڑھ چکا ہے آگے. تو اس سے مثال ہمیں ملتی ہے کہ جہاں تک ائمہ اہل بیت کی بات ہے، خود یہ جو سیرت ہے ائمہ، یہ دور ہے امیر المومنین سے لے کے غیبت صغریٰ تک 2.5 صدی. کیوں؟ یہ اسی لیے تھا کہ زمانہ بدلتا جائے گا اور ایک معصوم امام ہمارے لیے مشعل راہ بنیں گے کہ قانون قرآن کا ابھی بھی وہی ہے، سنت رسول اپنی جگہ پہ ہے، حالات بدل رہے ہیں، کس طرح سے ان ثابت اور دائمی احکام کو اپنے متغیر زمانے میں امپلیمنٹ کرو. صلوات پڑھنے پارا. ویلیوز نہیں بدلتی، بیسک قدریں جو ہیں وہ بدلنے والی نہیں ہیں. کربلا میں جو آپ دیکھ رہے ہیں، امام حسین علیہ السلام کو ہم کیا کہتے ہیں؟ وہ صرف حسین نہیں تھے اس زمانے کے جو کربلا میں تھے، ان کا ہم وارث حسن بھی کہتے ہیں، وارث علی بھی کہتے ہیں، وارث فاطمہ بھی کہتے ہیں، وارث رسول بھی کہتے ہیں، بلکہ سلسلہ جاتا ہے وارث آدم تک. زمانے کے فاصلے کو دیکھیں، مکان کے اختلاف کو دیکھیں، لیکن عنوان وراثت کا ہے. اس لیے کہ جو ویلیوز یہ انبیاء اور مرسلین لے کے آئے تھے، یہ ویلیوز اور یہ قدریں کانسٹنٹ ہیں، ان میں ثبات ہے، ان میں تغیر نہیں آئے گا. بود و باش اور رہن سہن الگ معاملہ ہے، طریقے بدلتے جائیں گے لیکن بنیادی مسائل کبھی نہیں بدلیں گے. اصحاب حسین کی عظمت اسی عنوان سے ہے کہ انہوں نے ان ویلیوز کو سمجھا ہے. حسین نے شب عاشور جو ان کے بارے میں کہا تھا کہ ہمیں فخر ہے تم پر، اس لیے کہ ہمیں وہ اصحاب ملے ہیں جو نہ میرے بھائی کو ملے، نہ میرے بابا کو ملے، نہ میرے نانا کو ملے. کیوں؟ وہ اصحاب جو رسول کے ساتھ جنگوں میں شہید ہوئے ہیں، یا وہ جو امام امیر المؤمنین اور امام حسن کے ساتھ جنگوں میں رہے اور ان کے خاطر شہید ہوئے ہیں، وہ اگر شہید ہوئے ہیں تو اپنا فریضہ سمجھ رہے تھے، ان پر واجب تھا کہ اپنے امام اور نبی وقت کی حمایت کریں. لیکن شب عاشور میں حسین نے اپنے اصحاب سے بیعت کو اٹھا لیا، اجازت دے دی تھی کہ تمہیں جانا ہو تو جاؤ، اور اجازت کے بعد ان سے کوئی قیامت کے دن سوال نہ کرتا. لیکن روایات میں کہیں نہیں ملتا ہے کہ ان میں سے ایک بندہ بھی اٹھ کے چلا گیا ہو، سب کے سب وہاں رہے. جو اعلان انہوں نے کیا تھا، ظہیر قین کا جو اعلان تھا کہ مولا یہاں تو ایک بار مرنا ہے، 70 بار بھی اگر ہمیں قتل کر دیا جائے، ہمارے جسم کو جلا دیا جائے، راہ کو جو ہے ہوا میں اڑا دیا جائے، پھر بھی 70 بار بھی اگر زندہ ہوں تو پھر بھی اپنی جان کو آپ کے قدموں پر نثار کریں گے. یہ جذبہ تھا، اور اسی لیے ہم ان کو سلام کہتے ہیں. اور اسی لیے چھٹے امام نے کہا ہے کہ ان کو جب یاد کرو تو یہ کہو کہ کاش اگر ہم ہوتے تو اس منزل پر فائز ہوتے جہاں فائز ہوئے. یہ وہ لوگ ہیں کہ جن کی شہادت نے وہ مٹی بھی جس میں وہ دفن ہوئے ہیں اسے طیب و پاک اور متبرک بنا دیا. یہ مرتبہ ہی نہیں ملا ہے. اور آج انہی اصحاب میں سے سب سے بزرگ جو صحابی ہیں ان کا ذکر کرنا چاہیں گے، جو صحابی رسول بھی تھے، جناب حبیب بن مظاہر. یہ کوفہ کے بہت ہی متقی و پرہیزگار لوگوں میں سے تھے. قرآن کے معلم تھے. کوفے میں لوگ بڑے احترام سے ان کو دیکھا کرتے تھے. علی کے ساتھ رہے، امام حسن کے ساتھ رہے. یہ ان لوگوں میں سے تھے جنہوں نے وہ خطوط بھیجے تھے امام حسین کو مکہ میں کہ آپ کوفہ آئیے. اور ان کم لوگوں میں سے ہیں کہ جنہیں موقع ملا کہ امام جب کربلا پہنچے ہیں تو اپنے کو کسی نہ کسی طرح کوفے سے کربلا پہنچاتے ہیں. 75 ایئرز اولڈ، ضعیف، لیکن بھروسہ حسین کو اتنا تھا، احترام اتنا تھا ان کا کہ جب عاشور کے دن اپنے لشکر کی تقسیم کی ہے 3 حصوں میں، میمنہ، میسرہ اور قلب لشکر، تو میمنہ کی سرداری جناب حبیب بن مظاہر کو دی. اور یہ کیوں؟ یہ اس لیے کہ ان کے دل میں محبت آل محمد اس عروج پہ تھی، جس کی مثال ملتی ہے اس وقت کہ جب ابو ثمامہ سیداوی نے نماز کو یاد کیا کہ مولا نماز کا وقت ہو چکا ہے اور ہماری خواہش ہے کہ پھر ایک بار آپ کے اقتداء میں ہم نماز ادا کریں. اس وقت امام نے لشکر یزیدی سے پیغام بھیجوایا کہ ان سے کہو کم سے کم کلمہ پڑھنے والے ہیں، یہ نماز کے لیے تو جنگ کو روکیں. لیکن وہاں سے کوئی جواب نہ ملا، بلکہ ایک اور لو رینکنگ افسر حسین بن نمیر ملعون نے ایک جملہ کہا کہ یا حسین صلاتک لا تقبل، نعوذ باللہ، کہ حسین آپ نماز پڑھ کے کیا کریں گے؟ آپ کی نماز قبول نہیں. یہ وہ توہین تھی کہ کانسٹنٹ ویلیو ہے. آل محمد کا احترام کبھی بھی چینج نہیں ہوگا. آل محمد کی توہین کبھی بھی برداشت نہیں ہو سکتی. زمانہ بدل جائے، جگہ بدل جائے، لیکن آل محمد کا احترام اپنی جگہ پہ. حبیب بن مظاہر سے یہ جملہ برداشت نہ ہوا. اپنی تلوار نکالتے ہیں، نمیر کی طرف حملہ کیا، اس کو گھوڑے سے زمین پہ گراتے ہیں، لیکن اس کے سپاہی آ کے اس کے بچا کے لے کے جاتے ہیں. لیکن حبیب بن مظاہر اس بزرگ مجاہد سے یہ صبر نہیں ہو سکا تھا کہ وہ حسین جن کے خاندان کا ذکر تشہد میں ہو، ان کے بارے میں کوئی یہ جرأت کرے اور کہے کہ ان کی نماز قبول نہیں ہو. مسلمانوں کی نماز آل محمد کے ذکر کے بغیر قبول نہیں ہوتی. یہ حسین آل محمد کا ایک فرد ہے. مولا سے اجازت چاہتے ہیں، جات کی جنگ لڑتے ہیں، لیکن یہ ضعیف سپاہی کب تک لڑتا؟ ایک مرتبہ جب ان پر حملہ ہوا، گھوڑے سے جب زمین پر آتے ہیں اور کوشش کی اپنے ہاتھوں کے سہارے بیٹھ سکیں زمین پہ، کہ 2 ملعون آتے ہیں، حملہ کرتے ہیں ایک تلوار سے اور ایک نیزے سے اس طرح سے پشت پہ وار کیا ہے اس نے کہ جناب حبیب اپنے کو سنبھال نہ سکے اور زمین کربلا میں گر جاتے ہیں، اور ان کی روح جو ہے ملائے اعلیٰ کی طرف پرواز کر جاتی ہے. امام حسین علیہ السلام نے جب یہ منظر دیکھا ہے، روایات میں ملتا ہے کہ ہر صحابی پر امام نے غم کیا ہے، لیکن چہرے کے تاثرات جو حبیب کے شہادت کے بعد ملتے ہیں وہ کسی اور صحابی کے سلسلے میں نہیں ملتے ہیں. بس اس ایک منظر کو بعد میں دیکھا ہے کہ وہ 2 قاتل وہ ملعون آتے ہیں، جناب حبیب کے سر کو تن سے جدا کرتے ہیں، اور اس میں سے ایک نے پھر اس سر کو اپنے گھوڑے کے لگام میں باندھ دیا. عزاداران حسین، جب یہ لشکر کوفہ پہنچا ہے، شہر دروازہ سے جب داخل ہوا تو وہاں ایک جوان تھا جس کا نام تھا قاسم بن حبیب. یہ جناب حبیب کا نوجوان بیٹا تھا. اس نے جب دیکھا کہ بابا کا سر ایک گھوڑے کی گردن میں لٹک رہا ہے،
وہ گھوڑے کے ساتھ ساتھ چلتے رہے. ابن زیاد کے دربار میں بھی گئے اور دربار سے جب وہ قاتل نکلا ہے تب بھی پیچھے پیچھے رہے. آخر میں وہ قاتل پلٹ کے پوچھتا ہے اے جوان میرا پیچھا کیوں کر رہے ہو؟ اس وقت قاسم بن حبیب کہتے ہیں یہ میرے بابا کا سر ہے, مجھ سے صبر نہیں ہو رہا ہے, مجھے دے دو تاکہ ہم دفن کر سکیں. دوران حسین قاسم بن حبیب سے کس صرف اتنا کہیں گے قاسم صرف باپ کے سر کا معاملہ ہے, نظروں کو اٹھا کے دیکھو, عابد بیمار کی طرف دیکھو, خاندان کے 18 سروں کا معاملہ ہے. عابد بیمار کے چہرے پر دیکھ کر صبر سے کام لو. الا لعنۃ اللہ علی القوم الظالمین سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. مات حسین.